The fire in the choosing basin threw light up the carved throat of the throne hall, and that light made every face look cut from old bone. Brannock stood above everyone, broad hand on the antlered chairback, voice already lifting for the vow that would nail his son to succession. Magnus knelt where he had ordered her, at the lower step, the place used for pledging servants and condemned oath-breakers. The stone there held cold even in summer, her palm was flat against it. Ash clung to the heel of her hand and smudged when she flexed her fingers once, slow, refusing to let the tremor in her wrist show. Keir was beside the basin, air cloak over one shoulder, jaw clenched so hard the tendon jumped at his neck. Mara sat at the record table with reed stylus poised over scrape skin, eyes moving from mouth to page with the precision of someone copying weather marks before rain erased them. Sable stood among the runners at the side aisle, lean, dark braid looped to keep clear of her collar. Ivan, her brother, shoulders set as if he could body-check the whole hall into honesty, held the post rail, fingers white around carved oak, breath flaring through his nose in short, furious bursts. Brannock raised his chin. "Before witness and fire, I name." Keir stepped forward and cut across him, voice like split flint. "I want her, not the crown that demanded I deny her." The hall did not breathe. The drum mallet in the hands of the right keeper hung above, stretched hide and did not fall. Somewhere in the high rafters a draft hissed through old timber seams, but below, not a body shifted. Magnus looked up. Keir turned toward her fully, not half, not hidden, and for a suspended instant all the old years between them had nowhere to hide. Then we pull back to winter, to hunger, to the eastern post where everything started with a ledger, a grain seal, and the sound of boots in snow. The year was 2022, and the levee wagons arrived with their axles crying, crusted white to the hubs. The post had expected full sacks and cured meat hooks loaded deep, enough to carry patrol crews through hard weeks and leave a buffer for late storms. The inventory stamp from the capital showed fullness, neat and authoritative in black wax, but when Magnus cut the first wax seal, the sack collapsed like an empty lung. Not empty, not full, filled with grain enough for a month and a lie enough for a season. Sable took position with slate and charcoal as soon as the wagons were lined by the store wall. She read numbers from branded tags while Magnus broke each seal and weighed each lot by hand against the hanging balance. The wind drove powdered snow through the loading arch in pale sheets that needled any bare skin. Men and women came in with ration bowls, faces wrapped in wool strips, eyes on Magnus because she did not pass anything without counting in front of them. Trust in winter was arithmetic done aloud. "Mark this as broken chain," Magnus said, lifting a snapped lead token that should have locked a wheat crate. "No transport damage, cut before arrival." Sable wrote it down without commentary. Her witness memory had always been frightening in its clean edges. If she heard a line once, she could return it weeks later with the same cadence, same pause, same swallowed consonant. She did not embroider, she restored. In calmer years, it made her useful. In this year, it made her dangerous to liars. By the time moonless night dropped over the palisade, they had a spread of opened cargo, split tags, and mismatched wax lined across 2 tables. Magnus kneaded thaw back into her fingers over the cookfire until pins and needles gave way to pain, then went back out to check the final stack herself. She found a row of flour sacks filled with husks under a skin of good meal. Someone had layered the lie carefully so it would pass shallow inspection and feed just enough for first reports to sound clean. She slit one sack fully and plunged both forearms in, feeling the textural change from fine meal to rough chaff halfway down. She held up both hands for the nearest quarter crew to see. "Top half is for counting eyes," she said. "Bottom half is for starving bodies." No one answered. A younger runner turned away and swallowed hard. 19 wolves died before thaw touched the black branches by the river. Some from fever sharpened by empty bellies. some from patrol weakness when the drifts came hard and visibility failed, one from a slip on ice while carrying half rations uphill because no one had strength for full loads. Magnus stood at each burial ridge while frost bit through her boots. Sable stood at each one too, naming who had been fed from which lot, in which week, because memory was now evidence and grief at once. They said names until their mouths felt numb with them. Not a list, never just a number, but still a number that could not be blurred. When Thaw finally arrived, Ivan, her brother, split lip, knuckles crusted with old blood from a perimeter scrap, came in from hunt with rage coiled under his skin. "They starved us on purpose," he said, dropping his spear against the wall so hard the iron tip sparked on stone. "Say the word and I take a crew west." Magnus did not look up from the ration chart at first. She forced herself to finish the line she was writing. "And do what, when you get there? Burn records? Burn wagons? Then they call us thieves and traitors. They already call us expendable. They call us useful when routes stay open." She finally met his gaze. "We keep routes open and keep every proof. Then when they force a right, we have ground under us." Ivan struck the table with his fist hard enough to tip an empty mug. It rolled, struck the wall, and kept spinning in tiny circles. "Ground doesn't stop bodies from freezing." "No," she said, "but names do not survive if we go wild now." Sable slid the charcoal slate closer. She tapped the line where Magnus had marked shortfall against stamped volume. "We keep this. We keep all of it. If they make us kneel later, we bring the floor with us." That was the winter Magnus learned what command tasted like when there was no title attached to it. It tasted like old iron from cracked teeth, and broth stretched thin with roots, and refusing to eat first while pretending not to smell hunger on yourself. It tasted like checking locks at midnight with a lantern gone smoky, like waking to a death report and asking for times, names, lot numbers before allowing yourself to break. By 2023, Thaw had not softened Brannick's appetite for control. He summoned elders, called a smaller hall session, and demanded Heir reject Magnus before witnesses to protect what he named pure succession. Magnus stood at the side wall in that older ceremony, not invited to speak, palms damp inside cuffs she could not unclench. Heir's words came clipped, as if each had to be dragged through wire. "I release claim," he had said then, eyes fixed past her shoulder to avoid seeing what he was cutting. The line must remain unbroken. She had not answered because there was no permitted reply. She had only felt the floor tilt and had set her jaw until the hearing ended, then walked out without staggering because she refused to give them even that. 3 years since that rejection, every muscle in her remembered the shape of it. Memory lived in body before thought. The jaw lock, the cold in her fingers, the exact point in her chest where breath had stopped. In 2026, the summons came with the king mark pressed deep in black wax. Choosing right in the throne hall, full pack attendance, heir naming to be sealed before fire count. Eastern post to throne hall was 47 miles by the river road if weather held, longer if ridge fog closed the turn above the slate cuts. Sable checked the route ledger against patrol notices and packed for speed anyway. Dry meat wrapped in wax cloth, spare laces, 2 charcoal sticks, 1 skin of water, 1 of bitter tea, concentrate that tasted like boiled bark and kept eyes open. "You can still refuse to appear," Ivan said, while Magnus rolled her travel cloak. Her brother stood in the doorway with his arms braced against the frame, blocking half the light. She tied the last strap with controlled force. "Refusal becomes admission." "Admission of what?" "That he defines me." She lifted the pouch of missing grain seals and tucked it beneath her belt where a sash would hide it. "I'm done being defined." The road to the hall was lined with late frost and old cairns, stacks of stone marking prior winters and prior dead. Hoofbeats and boot thud blurred into a steady rhythm that left no room for spiraling thoughts. They passed outer camps whose watchfires burned low and whose gatekeepers gave Eastern Post a look halfway between respect and warning. Sable marked each exchange in shorthand at rest breaks. Camp signs shone, gate delay in breaths, visible ration stacks by wall count. She marked everything. At mile 21, sleet turned to hard rain that rattled on cloak shoulders like thrown seed. At mile 30, they crossed the old bridge where two planks had warped and been braced with fresh iron. Sable noted the repair date carved into the side post. At mile 44, city smoke reached them first, then sound. Metalwork from lower yards, dog barks, shouted hawker lines. The city moving unaware that inside one hall a line of rule was about to split. When they reached the city rise, the throne hall already hummed with arrivals. Wolf-hide banners hung from beams. The ritual basin had been polished until it mirrored faces upside down and made every expression look haunted. Mara sat at the official record table near the central aisle, her inkstone wrapped in damp cloth to keep it from drying too quickly in the hall heat. She glanced up once when Magnus entered, then made a small sign of acknowledgement with the stylus tip before returning to prep. Magnus gave nothing back but a narrow nod. They understood one another. Words would matter later, and accuracy would matter more than comfort. Brannick entered to drum and horn. He wore a ceremonial torque heavy enough to strain his neck, silver links hammered with lineage symbols polished bright for visibility. He took the throne as if the hall itself had been built from his own bones. Heir followed in Heir colors and stopped at the prescribed mark by the basin. He did not search the room. He did not look at Magnus. That absence of look cut as sharply as direct contempt would have. Then Brannick's herald read the order that included her by name and rank, Omega, Eastern Post, called not as witness, but as object lesson. She was instructed to kneel at the lower step during Heir confirmation, in token of proper order. The phrase landed like spit. Ivan surged forward from the rail before anyone else moved. Sable caught his sleeve, then his wrist, then drove a sharp elbow into his side under cover of shifting bodies. Not here, she hissed without turning her head. Not for him. Magnus walked to the step on her own. She lowered herself with a straight spine and placed both hands on her thighs, not on the step this time, refusing the gesture of submission while technically obeying command. Brannick looked down and smiled with one side of his mouth, a smile built to be witnessed and remembered. Heir remained at the basin, shoulders rigid enough to ache just from looking at them. The drum sounded once to begin. The right keeper lifted the mallet for the cadence that would carry formal vow lines. Brannick began, voice amplified by the carved vault. By blood right and elder claim, I set before this pack my chosen heir, Heir Ashdown. Heir's gaze snapped to Magnus. Not a flick, not incidental. It held and held. Her breathing stopped without permission. She saw the pulse at the base of his throat kick hard under the skin, saw his hand curl near his own wrist as if resisting reach. The hall blurred at the edges around that one raw line of sight. For a few breaths, there was no Brannick, no law, only the fact of unresolved want and damage standing naked between them. Drums struck. He flinched, dragged his attention away, and shifted behind the air dais where no one but those nearest could see his fingers hover toward her. The back of his hand stopped an inch from her wrist. Then the second drum hit, and he withdrew as if burned. Brannick continued reciting scripted obligations, each phrase about continuity, purity, line. Magnus heard almost none of it. Her body knew only the sudden nearness and the retreat, the old wound reopened and salted in public. She forced herself to catalog details so she would not float away. Smell of lamp oil, scrape of wool on wood, the exact count of breaths between drum beats. Mara's stylus scratched steadily. When Brannick raised his hand for the heir's vow, Heir did not repeat the line fed to him. He stepped down from the dais level, crossed the sanctioned distance, and spoke toward Magnus instead of the throne. "I am finished with words borrowed from fear," he said. His voice cracked once and then steadied. "I want her, not the crown that demanded I deny her." The final word echoed from stone and beam. Someone dropped a cup near the back benches. Clay shattered and rolled. A child near the side aisle started crying and was hushed too late. Brannock came off the throne platform in 2 strides, fury bright and open. "You will not profane this right for rutting impulse." Keir turned on him with a violence more controlled than shouting. "You made me lie in 2023. You called it duty. You told me casualty tallies were inflated by weak stations and ordered me to recite lower counts to elders." He took another step so all could hear. "You dictated altered numbers in private and told me no one at Eastern would survive challenge anyway." A ripple hit the crowd, anger layered with recognition. Eastern post runners were present in the side rows. Several moved closer together, shoulders touching, as if instinctively rebuilding a line. Brannock barked a laugh too sharp to be believable. "Child tantrum. He clings to an omega and invents slander." Magnus rose from the lower step in one smooth motion. "Not invented." She pulled the cloth pouch from beneath her sash and spilled broken grain seal tokens onto the stone. They clicked and spun, dull lead against polished floor. "Winter levy in 2022. I counted missing seals firsthand, stamps marked full. Cargo arrived cut and layered. 19 dead before thaw." Sable stepped from the aisle and lifted a thick bundle wrapped in oilskin. Route ledgers, corners worn from handling and weather. She opened to marked pages and held them high enough for near benches to see. Transfer points, wagon marks, arrival weights, signatures matched against schedule. "Eastern chain held copies each stop," she said. "I carried these routes myself. Every dispatch point touched by the same discrepancy pattern." Brannock signaled guards. They hesitated. The hesitation was the first crack everyone could hear, a small human pause more powerful than any shout. Mara stood from the record table without waiting permission. She moved to the ritual tablets set in their wall niche near the basin, clay and stone composites used only for succession disputes. She read aloud in carrying cadence, each clause crisp. "Succession may be overturned by acclamation fire count when seated authority is challenged by proven breach of pack survival obligations. Threshold, 60 voices witnessed in hall." The hall erupted into layered noise. Brannock shouted for order, for arrest, for silence. None landed cleanly. Elders argued from opposite benches. Younger fighters yelled over them. Someone laughed once, harshly, then went quiet when nobody joined. Ivan pushed past the rail now, no one stopping him. He stopped short of Keir, chest heaving. "You rejected her when he snapped his fingers," he spat. "Now you speak because room shifted?" Keir did not retreat. "I spoke now because I stopped fearing him more than I feared losing her." "Convenient timing." "Coward timing," Keir said. "I own that." Ivan's hand twitched toward his knife, then dropped. "Not enough." Magnus stepped between them before either could escalate. "Then we do this right. Trial by testimony. In front of all." She looked to Mara. "Recorded." Mara nodded and reset her stylus over fresh skin, flattening the sheet with her left palm so it wouldn't buckle when her hand moved quickly. The right keeper, seeing the hall was far beyond the scripted ceremony, struck the drum in the emergency pattern used for contested proceedings. The rhythm pulled attention into a rough circle around the basin. Brannock remained near the throne, breathing hard, calculating angles in silence now that volume had failed him. Testimony began with Magnus. She gave dates, delivery marks, names of levy lines, exact handling steps she and Sable took. Seal checks before unloading, weight verification against stamped lots, second pass inspections after thaw cycles. She did not embellish. When grief rose, she swallowed and returned to verifiable sequence. She named all 19 dead by name before giving aggregate counts, because numbers without names had been part of the crime. Sable followed, reciting route data from memory before confirming each line against ledger pages held open for elders to inspect. Dispatch Point 3, wagon mark Black Crescent recorded full by capital stamp, arrived short by 47 stone grain equivalent, she said. Dispatch Point 5, same marking irregularity, same broken chain. Her voice never shook. She was not dramatic. She was exact. Keir's testimony came next. He described Brannock's private chamber, the map table, the tapped column where casualty numbers had been scratched and re-scratched. He repeated Brannock's order verbatim: report lower counts. Eastern losses are politically useful. He did not dress it in outrage. He delivered it flat, which made it worse. He also admitted his own compliance out loud, with no attempt to soften motive. I told myself obedience was protective. It was fear. Brannock denied every line, then tried to pivot to blood right again. Authority descends by lineage. Acclamation is advisory. Mara lifted the tablet and read the clause again, this time with the preceding sentence naming fire count as binding in breach cases. The old words were unambiguous. She held the tablet out for 2 elders to inspect incision depth and age markings so no one could claim fresh carving. Both elders, one once aligned with Brannock, nodded grimly. The hall moved toward decision. Voices were called by section, each shout answered by a pebble cast into one of 2 bronze bowls placed beside the basin. Uphold Brannock or elevate challenger. The right keeper and Mara counted by hand in full view. Sable, at Magnus's request, repeated each section total aloud as soon as it was tallied, so no one could contest hearing. North benches, 12 uphold, 19 elevate. River quarter, 3 uphold, 14 elevate. The rhythm of numbers replaced the earlier chaos. When the threshold line passed 60 for Magnus, a visible shiver went through the benches. Some looked relieved, some frightened by what relief meant. But counting continued to completion as law required. No shortcuts, no future loopholes. 73 voices for Magnus. The uphold bowl for Brannock sat far lower, pebbles uneven at the bottom like broken teeth. Brannock stared at the bowls as if they were counterfeit objects brought in by trick. Then he drew himself up and reached for rhetoric one last time. This hall is infected by sentiment. Outer camps remain mine. Outer camps depend on eastern supply routes, Sable said before anyone else answered. Route ledgers are already copied to their quartermasters. Stand-down terms can be offered now with continuity of provisions and amnesty for nonviolent compliance. Brannock spat at the floor near her boots. Runner thinks she can govern? Sable held his gaze. I think hungry camps choose food over your pride. Magnus did not sit the throne. Instead, she moved to the basin and faced the hall from ground level. I accept pack voice under right law, she said, not crown by blood, voice by acclamation. She turned to the nearest guard detail. Brannock is removed by right decision. Escort him out under guard. No public striking. No blood in this hall. The guards looked to the right keeper, then to Mara, then to the bowls. They closed in around Brannock with disciplined distance, hands ready but not grabbing until he lunged first. He fought only with words, curses snapping as he was turned toward the side gate. The hall did not cheer at first. It exhaled, the long breath of people who had braced for violence and found procedure instead. Then an elder from the river quarter shouted, "Eastern oath!" A second voice answered from the back. Sable stepped forward to the center line and called the Eastern Post oath once, then again, each recitation louder as more voices joined. On the third and final call, nearly the entire hall spoke with her, and the sound struck the vault like weather rolling down a valley wall. Ivan stood rigid through it, eyes on Keir. When the oath ended, he spoke toward Magnus without looking away from the man he still wanted to hit. Conditional acceptance. He repairs publicly what he broke publicly. Then we see. Agreed, Magnus said. Keir bowed his head once. Name terms. Magnus answered in the same open register. You stand before every station where my rejection was repeated and say what happened in 2023. You name coercion. You name your choice now. You do not ask me for private anything until that is done. I accept. The hall heard it. Mara wrote it. Ink made promise harder to wriggle out of. Crisis did not end with one bowl count. Runners came in before dusk with reports from outer camps. Confusion, splinter loyalties, questions about supply continuity, a few aggressive scouts testing whether orders still held. Magnus convened immediate stand-down talks in a side chamber with representatives from those camps, while the right fire still burned in the main hall. The chamber smelled of lamp smoke and wet wool. A long table sat in the middle, scarred by older disputes. Sable spread route maps across it and showed exactly where grain could be redirected without starving river settlements. She weighted corners with knife sheaths so the parchment would stop curling. If caravans are disrupted, everyone loses meat weight by deep cold. This is not a faction problem. This is winter physics. One envoy from the Western Ridge camp jabbed a finger at a route line. You're asking us to trust Eastern control while we stand down armed? I'm telling you, this line feeds your children by first frost, Sable said, tapping the same line. You can call that trust or self-interest. The wagons won't care. Another envoy, older, voice tired, asked Mara to restate the legal basis. Mara read the acclamation clause and final count again. Threshold 60, recorded 73 for Magnus, read in presence of witnesses. She invited any envoy to compare her copied tally with the Right Keeper's own board. 2 did. They matched. Keir stood at Magnus's shoulder but spoke only when asked. That restraint was noticed. When one envoy challenged him directly, "And if Brannock calls you back?" he answered without flourish. "He no longer commands me. Right law does." Then he shut up again. Mara moved between chambers, recording terms as they were voiced. No retaliation patrols, no seizure of family quarters, continuation of existing ration schedules pending review, safe passage for envoys returning with signed terms. Each camp envoy pressed for advantage. Each was answered with concrete route and stock reality. By night's deepest hour, most agreed to stand down contingent on visible legality and uninterrupted provisions. Legality had been proven in public. Provisions were already under Eastern chain control. When the talks finally broke, the hall had emptied to embers and exhausted sweepers. Magnus stood near a side corridor where carved stone wolves watched from shadow, their eyes worn smooth by generations of passing hands. Her hands shook now that no one needed to see stillness. She pressed them against her ribs until the tremor passed. Keir approached slowly, stopping at speaking distance, and no closer. I kept to your condition. You kept to first condition, she corrected. Public declaration is not repair by itself. I know. He waited. She let the waiting sit long enough to test whether he would fill it with pressure, apology, demand. He did not. He breathed, looked at her, said nothing. She stepped toward him then, closing the distance by choice. In that close span she could see the pulse working in his throat, fast and unhidden. Iron and smoke clung to him from the basin fire and from old training yards, mixed with sweat dried into air-cloak wool. Her own heartbeat kicked off rhythm, caught, then stuttered back. Her body remembered him and remembered the break, both at once. He lifted a hand and halted before touching. May I? Yes, she said, and the word came rough. His fingers reached her wrist exactly where he had hovered earlier behind the dais. Contact was warm, careful, almost formal. The sensation ran up her arm like a line pulled taut. They moved to a private chamber offered for rest. Door barred from inside. No audience, no law script. Just two people who had spent years speaking around a wound. The room held a narrow bed, a cracked wash basin, one chair, one shuttered window leaking cold at the frame. Heir pulled the air cloak free and set it over a chair as if setting down a burden that had chafed too long. "If we cross now," he said, voice lower. "Old claim law reads it as irrevocable bond assertion. Even overturned, some will say the old line still binds by body." Magnus faced him squarely. "Then say it plain. We cross only if both choosing, no coercion, no duty claim, no lineage claim. And if we stop, we stop," she said, at any breath. She reached for his jaw, thumb grazing stubble and the tight line of held tension. "I wanted this before he made it a weapon. I still want it. But I will not be taken into another cage built from ceremony." "You won't," he said. "Not by me." They leaned in, foreheads touching first, breath mingling in small, uneven pulls. Kiss followed slow, then harder, then slowed again, when memory of coercion flashed between them like a knife tip. They broke apart, named what frightened them, then resumed with consent spoken and resaid. Earned hesitation was not weakness, it was a boundary held intact while desire moved through it. Some vows need flesh to mean anything, others need restraint. By dawn they had not consummated, they had chosen pause, named intention, and kept it. The line would be crossed when public repair had been completed, and when the choice carried no shadow of leverage. The decision left both of them raw and steadier for it. Morning brought consequence in full daylight. Courtyard testimony convened for those who could not enter the packed hall the night before. Frost glazed the flagstones, every exhale was visible. Ivan, her brother, still bristling with old anger, demanded his own chance to question Heir in public as agreed. Magnus granted it and stood nearby, not intervening unless rules broke. Ivan's anger was surgical now instead of explosive. "In 2023, when you said release claim, did you believe those words?" "No." "Why speak them?" "Because Brannick told me refusal would trigger levy penalties against Eastern before deep cold. I believed him. I chose fear and told myself it was protection." Ivan's jaw flexed. "And now? Now I understand that lie fed the same machine that killed 19. Ivan looked to Magnus, then back. "Conditional acceptance stands. You earn place by action, not speech." Heir bowed once. Understood. Mara recorded each exchange from the courtyard edge, stylus moving in relentless lines despite stiff fingers. Her integrity had become a bulwark against counterclaim. Already rumors were running in outer lanes that fire count had been manipulated, that tablet lines had been misread, that Eastern had smuggled extra voices. By midday, she requested a public readback of key testimony in the hall to halt distortion. Magnus approved. Mara read without flourish, including lines that made allies uncomfortable. Accuracy protected everyone or no one. Over the next stretch of days, Heir kept the repair terms. He traveled station to station with runner escorts and repeated the truth where rejection had once been announced. He named coercion, named his own cowardice, named Magnus's refusal to accept private comfort without public correction. At each station, people judged him with their own eyes. Some spat near his boots. Some listened in silence with arms folded. A few nodded once and turned away. Repair was not applause. It was repetition under scrutiny. At the hill station, he spoke in a store shed because wind was too loud outside. Flour dust floated in the light while he talked. At Riverbend, he stood on a ferry ramp between wet ropes and repeated the same lines to workers who never stopped hauling. At the Pine Barracks, he spoke after night meal while spoons still scraped bowls, forcing himself to continue when one old patrol captain interrupted to call him weak. He answered, "Yes," and kept going. Sable coordinated these circuits while also managing stand-down implementation with outer camps. Her ledgers became operational maps for peace, where flour moved, where saltfish was diverted, where patrol overlap needed trimming to avoid accidental provocation, where bridge repairs had to be prioritized before first heavy snow. She slept in snatches and drank bitter tea gone cold, never missing a transfer line. Twice she caught falsified side notes from minor quartermasters trying to skim stock for emergency reserves. Both times she corrected in public and logged names. Brannock's loyalists tested limits twice, trying to seize a small ridge store and later to intercept a runner team. Both times, negotiated terms and visible supply continuation undercut appetite for escalation. In the Ridge case, nearby camps refused to join once they saw delivery schedules still being honored. In the runner interception, locals ringed the road and demanded the Loyalist band stand down or be cut off from the next grain convoy. Camps that might have rallied to old blood right accepted ration stability and legal clarity over chaos. No civil fracture opened beyond repair. When Keir returned from the final station declaration, he came straight to Eastern Post rather than the city. Magnus met him by the old loading arch where they had first catalogued broken seals years earlier. Snow had not yet returned, but the air carried that pre-winter metallic hint that turned breath sharp. "You completed terms," she said. "I did." Sable stood at Magnus's right, as she had in every decisive moment, arms crossed over a ledger tucked to her side. Ivan, her brother, leaning against a post nearby, watched with an expression that stayed hard but no longer murderous. Magnus took Keir's hand in full view of both of them. Then, private bond is back on the table by my choice. Ivan blew out a breath that might have been a laugh if he were a softer man. "Don't make me regret this." Keir met his stare. "Hold me to it." Night settled over the post with cook-fire smoke rising straight in still air. In Magnus's quarters there were no ceremonial objects, only practical things. A folded route map, a chipped basin, wool blankets patched at corners, the pouch of broken grain seals hanging from a peg as reminder and warning. She touched the pouch once before turning to Keir. "Still yes?" he asked. "Still yes," she answered. This time consummation came with no law hovering, no throne watching. Consent had already been spoken enough times to become trust instead of script. Their bodies found each other with hunger and care interlaced, pauses for checking, small words between kisses, hands learning again without urgency to prove anything to anyone. When memory snagged, they slowed. When one shifted, the other followed. Nothing was claimed. Everything was chosen. Afterward, they lay side by side listening to wind against shutter slats and the far bark of a sentry call. Magnus traced circles on the back of his hand until her breathing evened. Keir pressed a kiss to her shoulder and did not speak, understanding silence could be tenderness too. Weeks later, formal investiture of Pack Voice was held back in the throne hall, now stripped of Brannock's lineage banners and hung with neutral pack marks. Magnus entered not by side aisle but center line. She wore no crown, only the eastern clasp at her shoulder, and a plain torque signifying voiced mandate. Mara announced proceedings. Sable stood at right position, witness and runner chief, posture easy only to those who didn't know how hard she had worked to make this room possible. Keir stood one step behind and left, visible but not central, exactly as agreed. Ivan stood with the Eastern contingent at the front bench, jaw set, present. Before oath renewal, Mara requested one formal identification for archival continuity and spoke it into the hall. Magnus Wildfire elected Pack Voice by lawful acclamation. The full name rang and then dissolved into present tense as everyone returned to first names and function. Magnus addressed governance in practical terms. Levy audits under multi-station witness, casualty reporting direct from station healers, route transparency across camps, succession review tied to consent as well as competence. She laid out a rotating witness schedule so no single station held all records. She assigned duplicate archives to Mara's custody and to 2 additional scribes chosen from different factions, reducing single-point failure. She mandated broken seal reporting within 1 day of arrival, with public posting by lot number. No grand metaphors, only mechanisms born from winter loss. There was resistance. One elder protested that too many witnesses slowed command response. Magnus answered, "Delay from verification is cheaper than burial from fraud." Another argued consent language weakened lineage stability. She answered, "Stability built on coercion is collapse with better clothing." The hall murmured, then quieted. At the close, she asked for Eastern oath. Sable called it once. Voices joined faster now, less from shock than from commitment tested in hard days. Afterward, as crowd thinned, Mara approached with a tired smile and ink on her thumb. "You know they'll try stories anyway." "They can try," Magnus said. "We have memory in living mouths." Mara gave a short nod. "Better than stone alone?" Brannock was seen once more at distance on a guarded departure road, torque removed, cloak plain, heading toward exile quarters assigned by council terms. He did not look back at the Hall Ridge. No one pursued vengeance. Removal by right had done what blood feud could not. That restraint was an achievement as real as any speech. Deep cold came again, as it always does. This time, Eastern stores were full, seals intact, and transfer marks matched on arrival without argument. Sable verified first wagon herself and grinned for the first time in memory when the balance settled exactly where it should. She smacked the scale post with open palm and said, "That's what truth weighs." In the first storm of the season, Magnus stood on the eastern post wall with Heir and Ivan, her brother between challenge and loyalty, still both, while snow slanted through torchlight. Below, runners moved between storehouse and barracks in practice lines. No one shouted in panic. The chain held. Ivan pulled his hood lower and glanced at Heir. "Still conditional." Heir almost smiled. "Good." Magnus leaned forearms on cold stone and watched the yard. "Keep it that way." Snow gathered along the parapet edge, softening old chips in the stone. Somewhere below, a cook laughed at something too muffled to hear. A patrol pair changed watch without being told twice. Ordinary order after years of engineered scarcity felt almost unreal. Near midnight, when patrol horns had gone quiet and only the wind spoke through the palisade gaps, Magnus went down alone to the store arch. She ran her thumb over a fresh grain seal, unbroken and true, then pressed it back into place. For the first time since 2022, she felt the floor under her as something she had chosen, not something she had been forced to kneel on.